Rain had been falling on Dunmore for 3 days straight, and Daniel Reyes was tired of the smell of wet soil. He stood at the edge of his cornfield, boots sinking into the mud, checking the drainage ditches he had dug the summer before. Water rushed through them the way he had planned, but the sky above still looked heavy and dark, like it had more to give. Dunmore was not a place people talked about. It sat far from the busy trade routes, far from the shining core worlds where towers touched the clouds and ships came and went like buses. Here there were only fields, a handful of farms, and a small town with one general store and one clinic. Daniel liked it that way. He had grown up on this land, learned to fix machines from his father, and after his parents passed, he stayed to keep the farm alive. He did not need excitement. He needed rain to stop and crops to grow. That night the storm turned strange. The wind picked up in a way that did not match the weather reports on his old radio. Then came the sound. It was not thunder. Thunder rolled and faded. This was a scream of metal and fire, cutting across the sky and ending in a crash somewhere behind the tree line past his east field. Daniel grabbed his jacket and a flashlight without thinking twice. Most people on Dunmore would have called the town sheriff and waited inside, but Daniel was not built that way. If something was hurt out there, in this weather, waiting meant it might not survive the night. He had spent his whole life pulling calves out of ditches and nursing sick animals back to health. This did not feel so different, even if the sound had been unlike anything he had heard before. The mud fought him with every step. Branches slapped against his arms as he pushed through the tree line, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly in the rain. Then he saw it. A long scar cut through the earth, black and smoking despite the downpour, ending in a shape that did not belong on Dunmore. It was not a satellite. It was not a plane. It looked like no ship he had ever seen in the old training manuals from his engineering days, curved and dark, with markings that glowed faintly blue even through the mud. He stepped closer, and that was when he heard it, a small sound almost swallowed by the rain, a whimper. Daniel moved his flashlight toward the wreckage and found the source. Curled against a broken piece of metal was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It was about the size of a large dog, but its body was covered in scales that shimmered faintly, silver and blue, even in the dark. Two folded wings, torn in places, pressed tightly against its sides. Its eyes, when it opened them, glowed a soft gold, wide with fear and pain. Daniel froze for a moment. Every instinct told him to step back, to run, to call someone, but the creature was shaking. Its breathing was fast and shallow, the kind of breathing he had seen in animals close to death. It was not attacking him. It was not even trying to move. It was just scared and hungry and hurt. He crouched down slowly, keeping his voice low and steady, the same voice he used with spooked horses. "Easy now," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature's golden eyes followed him, but it did not flinch away when he reached out. Daniel took off his jacket and wrapped it gently around the small body, careful of the torn wings. It was lighter than he expected, but its skin was cold, far too cold for something alive. He carried it back through the storm, holding it close to keep it warm, ignoring the mud that soaked through his boots and the rain that ran down his neck. By the time he reached his house, his arms ached and his shirt was plastered to his back, but the creature was still breathing, and that was all that mattered to him. Inside, he laid it near the wood stove and got the fire roaring. He found an old wool blanket and tucked it around the shivering form. The creature watched him with those glowing eyes, still afraid, still unsure, but it did not try to escape. Daniel searched his kitchen for anything he could offer. He had no idea what it ate, so he started simple: a bowl of warm broth left over from dinner, a few strips of dried meat, some bread. He set them down close enough for the creature to reach without forcing it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the creature's head lifted, nostrils flaring at the smell of food. It moved slowly, almost cautiously, before finally lowering its head and eating. It was fast and desperate, like it had not eaten in days, maybe longer. Daniel refilled the bowl twice more before the creature finally slowed down, its sides rising and falling in a calmer rhythm. As it ate the last piece of bread from his hand, something strange happened. A warmth passed between them, faint but real, like a hand resting gently on his chest from the inside. Daniel blinked, unsure if he had imagined it. The creature's eyes softened, and for the first time it did not look afraid. Outside, the storm slowly began to fade, but far above the clouds, unseen by Daniel or anyone else on Dunmore, something old and powerful had already begun to stir, drawn toward a signal it had not felt in generations. Daniel did not know what he had found in the mud that night. He only knew it needed help, and he had given it. He had no idea that decision would soon bring an entire kingdom to his door. Morning light came through the kitchen window slowly, filtered by clouds still heavy from the storm. Daniel woke up on the floor beside the wood stove, his back stiff from sleeping on the old rug instead of his bed. He had not wanted to leave the creature alone during the night, so he had stayed close, feeding the fire whenever it began to die down. The creature was awake before him, watching him with those golden eyes. In the daylight, Daniel could see it more clearly. Its scales were a mix of silver and deep blue, catching the light in a way that reminded him of oil on water. Its wings, though torn in a few places, had already started to look less limp than the night before. It was smaller than he first thought, maybe the size of a large dog, but there was something about the way it held itself, alert and thoughtful, that made Daniel feel like it understood far more than any animal should. "You hungry again?" Daniel asked, mostly to himself, standing up with a groan. The creature's head lifted at once, and Daniel almost laughed. That answered his question. He spent the next hour going through his kitchen, giving the creature whatever he had. It ate everything he offered, meat, bread, even a bit of dried fruit, and still seemed hungry. By the time Daniel checked his food storage, he realized with a slight worry that he had used almost half of what he had meant to last him 2 more weeks. Still, he did not consider holding back. Something about the creature's trust in him, the way it leaned into his hand when he touched its head, made turning it away feel impossible. He decided to call it Scout, since it reminded him of a curious dog he once had that explored every corner of the farm without fear. The name seemed to fit, especially when Scout began wandering around the house that afternoon, sniffing at furniture, tilting its head at the ticking clock on the wall, and letting out small chirping sounds whenever something interested it. Word had not reached town yet about the crash, and Daniel decided to keep it that way for now. He did not know what Scout was, and until he understood more, he did not want anyone showing up with questions he could not answer. Dunmore's sheriff was a reasonable man, but strangers with cameras and clipboards from the colonial administration were another matter, and Daniel had heard enough stories about what happened to unusual discoveries on frontier worlds. They rarely stayed with the people who found them. Over the next 2 days, Scout grew, not in a slow way like a puppy might, but in noticeable jumps. By the second morning, Scout's wings had healed enough to twitch and stretch, no longer hanging loose and broken. By the second evening, Scout was nearly twice the size it had been when Daniel first found it, and it had started making low, rumbling sounds in its chest that Daniel could feel through the floor when he sat nearby. The rapid growth worried him, but not enough to change his mind. He simply adjusted, moving Scout's resting spot to the barn, where there was more room, and setting up extra straw for warmth. He kept working his fields during the day, checking on Scout during breaks, bringing food whenever he could spare it. On the third night, strange things began happening around the farm. Daniel's dog, an old mutt named Rusty who mostly slept all day, would not stop barking at the tree line. The chickens grew restless, clustering together instead of spreading out like usual. Daniel stepped outside once, flashlight in hand, and thought he saw a flicker of light far above the clouds, gone before he could be sure he had seen anything at all. He mentioned it to no one, mostly because he had no idea what to say. A crashed ship, a strange creature that like it had never eaten before, lights in the sky that vanished too fast to explain. None of it made sense on its own, but together it felt like pieces of something much bigger than Daniel Ray's and his quiet farm. Scout seemed to sense the change too. On the third night, it grew restless, packing the barn, letting out low calls that echoed strangely, almost like it was trying to reach something far away. Daniel sat with it for hours, talking quietly, the way he used to calm frightened animals during storms, though he suspected Scout understood far more of what he said than any animal ever had. "Whatever's coming," Daniel said softly, resting a hand on Scout's side as it finally settled down. "I'm not going to let anything hurt you. All right." Scout's golden eyes studied him for a long moment, and though it could not speak, Daniel felt certain it understood. It let out a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and leaned its head against his shoulder. Daniel did not sleep well that night, listening to every distant sound, every shift in the wind. Around him, Dunmore remained quiet and unaware, its people sleeping soundly in their homes, farmers dreaming of harvests, children dreaming of nothing important at all. But high above the clouds, closer now than the night before, something massive moved through the dark, following a call that had not been heard by its kind in a very long time. It was getting closer to Dunmore with every passing hour, and by the time the sun rose again, Daniel's quiet farm would no longer be quiet at all. The first sign that something was wrong came just before dawn, when every bird on Daniel's farm suddenly stopped singing. Daniel had been up early, as usual, filling a bucket at the well when the silence hit him. No birds, no wind through the trees. Even Rusty, who had barked at shadows all week, now stood frozen by the porch steps, ears pinned back, staring at the sky. Daniel followed his gaze and felt his stomach drop. The clouds above his farm were moving strangely, curling and parting in a way that had nothing to do with weather. Something huge was pressing down through them, blotting out the early morning light. Daniel dropped the bucket, water spilling across the dirt, and ran for the barn. Scout was already awake, standing at full alert, wings half spread, staring toward the same patch of sky. The rumbling sound from days before had returned, but now Daniel felt it through his entire body, not just the floor. It was not coming from Scout, it was coming from above. Daniel had never seen anything descend from orbit before, not up close. The colony ships that occasionally passed near Dunmore stayed high, distant streaks of light barely visible from the ground. What broke through the clouds that morning was nothing like that. It was massive, easily larger than the town's entire grain silo, moving with a grace that felt unnatural for something so big, and it was not alone. Behind it came more shapes, smaller but still enormous compared to anything Daniel owned, spreading out above the fields like a slow-moving storm made of metal and light. Within minutes, Daniel's farm was surrounded. The ships did not fire, did not attack, but their presence alone was enough to shake the ground and rattle the windows of his house. Neighbors from nearby farms had already begun shouting across fences, some grabbing old hunting rifles, others simply staring in shock. Dunmore had never seen anything like this, and fear spread through the town faster than any storm ever had. Daniel stood in front of the barn, Scout pressed close against his side, as the largest ship settled into the field behind his house, crushing a section of corn beneath its weight. A section of its hull opened, and light spilled out, followed by a figure that made Daniel's breath catch. She was enormous, easily 3 times his height, with scales that shimmered deep green and gold, wings folded neatly behind her like a cloak. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept across the farm before settling directly on Daniel and the creature beside him. She did not look angry. She looked focused, controlled, like someone who had traveled a long way for exactly this moment. "That is close to her," Daniel muttered under his breath, glancing down at Scout, whose posture had changed entirely. Where Scout had always leaned toward Daniel with curiosity, now it stood taller, wings spreading slightly, chest puffed out in a way that looked almost proud. The massive figure took slow steps forward, the ground trembling with each footfall until she stopped a short distance away. Her voice, when it came, was deep and carried easily across the quiet farm, though Daniel could not immediately understand the language. Scout, however, responded at once, letting out a series of chirps and low sounds, moving forward to meet her halfway. Daniel's heart pounded as he watched the exchange, unsure whether to step forward or stay back. He had spent days protecting this creature, feeding it, keeping it warm, and now he stood helpless as something clearly far more powerful examined it closely, running a clawed hand gently along its side and wings. Then, to Daniel's surprise, a soft chime sounded near the woman's collar, and when she spoke again, the words came out slightly delayed but understandable, translated by some device Daniel could not see. "You are the one who found her," the woman said, her golden eyes locking onto Daniel's. Daniel swallowed hard. I found something hurt in the woods after the storm. I didn't know what it was, I just helped it. The woman studied him for a long moment, saying nothing, while behind her, more figures began descending from the other ships, some armed, all watching Daniel with sharp, careful eyes. Scout moved suddenly, stepping between Daniel and the group, letting out a firm, loud call that echoed across the field. The armed figures paused. The woman's expression shifted slightly, something like surprise crossing her features. "She protects you," the woman said quietly, almost to herself. "That is unusual." Daniel glanced down at Scout, whose golden eyes were fixed protectively on the strangers, small wings still spread wide despite being far smaller than any of them. Whatever Scout was, whatever these visitors were, one thing had become very clear to Daniel in that moment. This was no ordinary animal he had saved in the storm. "My name is Daniel," he said carefully, deciding that honesty was the only path forward. "I didn't know she was anything special. I just didn't want her to die out there alone." The woman's eyes softened slightly, though her posture remained rigid, commanding. "I am Sci-Fi," she said, "and what you found, Daniel, is the last daughter of my line, the heir to the Dragon Kingdom." Behind her, the gathered figures shifted uneasily, and Daniel felt the weight of dozens of unfamiliar eyes settle on him, waiting to see what would happen next. Word of what was happening on Daniel's farm reached Dunmore's town center within the hour, though no one there fully understood it. Phones buzzed with confused messages. The sheriff tried 3 times to reach the colonial administration on the mainland and got nothing but static. For a town used to quiet mornings and simple problems, the sight of alien ships settling into a cornfield was enough to send half the population into a panic, and the other half rushing toward the farm to see for themselves, kept back only by a line of armed figures Sci-Fi had stationed at the property's edge. Inside the barn, away from the crowd gathering at a distance, Daniel sat across from Sci-Fi on an overturned crate, feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. Scout rested beside him, refusing to move even a few steps away, her body curled protectively against his side. "Tell me everything," Sci-Fi said, her voice calm but firm, "from the moment you found her." Daniel explained it plainly, the way he explained most things without exaggeration. The storm, the crash, the frightened, starving creature curled in the wreckage. He described giving her his coat, warming her by the fire, feeding her whatever he had until she stopped shaking. He mentioned the strange warmth he had felt when she finished eating from his hand, though he admitted he still did not understand what it meant. Sci-Fi listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable, though her eyes occasionally flicked towards Scout, who chirped softly at certain parts of the story, as if confirming details Daniel could not have known to include. When he finished, Sci-Fi was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know what you have done?" she finally asked. Daniel shook his head honestly. "I know she's important to you. I didn't know that when I found her. I just saw something hurt and hungry." "That is exactly why it matters," Sci-Fi said. "Among my people, a life freely saved, without demand for reward, without knowledge of gain, is the rarest kind of gift. Most who encounter our young, especially royal blood, either flee in fear or attempt to use them for advantage. You did neither." She rose to her feet, towering over him even as she kept her tone gentle. "Your kind is still new to the wider galaxy. You do not yet understand what a life debt means to the Dragon Kingdom. It is not a small thing. It is not a thank you exchanged and forgotten. It is a bond that lasts generations, honored by our entire kingdom, respected even by kingdoms that despise each other." Daniel felt a flicker of worry. "I don't want anything from you," he said quickly. "I didn't do it for a reward." "I know," Sci-Fi said, and for the first time, something like warmth entered her expression. "That is precisely why the debt is so absolute." Outside, Daniel could hear more ships arriving, their engines humming low over the fields, joined by the murmur of Dunmore's frightened residents held back at a respectful distance. Inside colonial offices far across the planet, officials were scrambling to understand what had landed on their quiet frontier world, torn between fear of an alien invasion and desperate hope that this might be the opposite, first contact with a peaceful, powerful species. Sci-Fi turned to one of her generals, a broad, dark-scaled figure standing near the barn entrance, and spoke rapidly in her own language. The general's eyes widened slightly before he nodded and disappeared to relay orders. Daniel caught only a few words through the translator, but one stood out clearly: alliance. "What happens now?" Daniel asked, still uneasy despite Sarai's calmer tone. "Now," Sarai said, "the Dragon Kingdom repays its debt, not because you asked, because it is our way." She glanced down at Scout, who nuzzled gently against Daniel's arm. "My daughter has chosen you as her protector, whether either of you understand what that means yet. That bond cannot be undone, and I would not wish to undo it even if I could." Daniel opened his mouth to protest, to explain again that he wanted nothing, expected nothing, but Sarai raised a clawed hand gently, silencing him without unkindness. "You misunderstand," she said. "This is not a punishment, Daniel. It is an honor few outside our kingdom have ever received. Your world, your people, your farm, all of it now falls under the protection of the Dragon Kingdom. What you do with that protection is yours to decide, but the debt itself is not optional. It is law older than your entire colony." Daniel looked down at Scout, who watched him with those familiar golden eyes, calmer now, trusting, as if she had known all along how this would unfold. Whatever fear he felt began to soften into something else, a mix of disbelief and quiet acceptance. Outside the barn, the sun climbed higher over Dunmore, lighting up a field filled with alien ships, worried townsfolk, and a farmer who had simply wanted to save something hungry from the storm. None of them yet understood how much this quiet decision would change, not just for Daniel, but for every human on the planet below. 3 weeks after the ships first landed, Dunmore no longer looked like the sleepy farming town Daniel had grown up in. New buildings had gone up near the town's center, simple structures made from materials the colonists had never used before, gifted by the Dragon Kingdom as part of what Sarai called the first repayment. The old dirt road leading to Daniel's farm had been widened and reinforced, no longer turning to mud with every storm. Farmers who once struggled with failing equipment now had access to tools that made their work faster and safer. Daniel had not asked for any of it, but Sarai had been clear from the beginning that refusing the debt was not something he could do. Slowly, he had stopped fighting it and started focusing instead on making sure the changes actually helped his neighbors, rather than just sitting back and letting things happen around him. News of Dunmore spread quickly beyond the colony, first through official reports sent to the core worlds, then through less official channels. Rumors passed between traders and travelers who could hardly believe what they were hearing. A human farmer on a forgotten frontier world had earned the favor of the Dragon Kingdom, a species most humans had only heard about in old data files, known for staying distant, careful, and almost impossible to approach. With the news came visitors Daniel had not expected. Colonial officials arrived first, dressed in clean uniforms that looked out of place against Dunmore's dirt roads, eager to understand what kind of deal might be made with such a powerful ally. Daniel met with them politely but firmly, making it clear he had no interest in using Scout or the debt Sarai spoke of for personal gain. He wanted the colony protected and supported, nothing more. Not everyone shared his patience. A representative from a larger trade company arrived a week later, offering Daniel wealth beyond anything Dunmore had ever seen if he would simply encourage a formal trade agreement favoring their company's interests. Daniel refused without hesitation, and when Scout, now the size of a small horse, let out a low warning growl at the man's raised voice, the representative left far faster than he had arrived. Word of the refusal reached Sarai, who visited the farm not long after, finding Daniel repairing a fence with tools he still preferred over anything the Dragon Kingdom had offered. She watched him work for a while before speaking. "You could have accepted his offer," she said. "Many in your position would have." Daniel shrugged, tightening a bolt. "Wasn't interested in getting rich off something that wasn't mine to sell. Scout's not a bargaining chip." Sarai's expression, still difficult for Daniel to read most days, softened into something close to approval. "That is precisely why my people trust you," she said. "Among the Dragon Kingdom, restraint is valued as highly as strength. You have shown both." Not all of Sarai's own people agreed with the growing alliance. A faction among the Dragon Kin, led by a sharp-eyed elder named Kova, argued that trusting an unknown species so completely, so quickly, was reckless, no matter how genuine one farmer's kindness had been. Kova visited Dunmore personally, circling Daniel's farm with clear suspicion, testing his patience with pointed questions about human ambition and hidden motives. Daniel answered honestly each time, refusing to defend himself with anything other than the truth. Eventually, even Kova's sharp gaze softened slightly, though he remained cautious, unwilling to fully trust so soon. Meanwhile, Scout continued to grow, both in size and understanding. She had begun learning basic human words, chirping them back at Daniel with surprising accuracy, while also teaching him simple gestures from her own language. Their bond, formed that first stormy night, only grew stronger, evident to every dragon and human who watched them together. As trade routes opened and new technology arrived, Dunmore transformed from a forgotten frontier town into a hopeful bridge between two worlds. Farmers learned alongside dragon engineers. Children from the colony played cautiously, then eagerly, with young dragons visiting alongside their parents. Slowly, fear turned into curiosity, and curiosity turned into friendship. Daniel found himself, much to his own surprise, standing at the center of it all, not because he sought power or attention, but because he refused to abandon something that needed help. Sarai eventually asked him to formally represent Dunmore in future dealings with the Dragon Kingdom, a request Daniel accepted reluctantly, mostly because Scout refused to let anyone else fill that role beside her. By the end of those 3 weeks, Daniel's quiet farm had become something far bigger than he ever imagined, not through conquest or clever planning, but through a simple choice made on a stormy night, to feed something hungry and ask for nothing in return. 6 months after the storm that changed everything, Dunmore prepared for a ceremony no one in the colony had ever imagined hosting. The fields outside Daniel's farm, once quiet and empty, now held a gathering unlike anything the frontier world had seen. Dragon ships lined the horizon, not as a threat this time, but as guests, arranged neatly beside temporary structures built for the occasion. Colonists mixed easily among visiting dragons, sharing food, exchanging stories, no longer flinching at the sight of wings or scales. Daniel stood near the center of it all, dressed simply, feeling out of place despite everyone's attention being focused on him. Beside him, Scout stood tall and proud, fully grown now, her silver and blue scales catching the afternoon sunlight, wings spread slightly in a display of confidence she had not shown as a frightened hatchling curled in wreckage. Sarai approached slowly, her presence commanding silence across the gathered crowd, both human and dragon alike. She carried herself the same way she had the first day Daniel met her, though something in her expression had changed, softer now, familiar rather than guarded. 6 months ago, Sarai began, her voice carrying easily across the field, translated instantly for the human crowd. A farmer found something broken and hungry in a storm. He did not know what she was. He did not ask what reward he might receive. He simply helped. Daniel felt his face heat up slightly as heads turned toward him, but Scout nudged him gently with her head, steadying him the way she often did when nerves threatened to overwhelm him. That single choice, Sarai continued, led to a bond few could have predicted. A life debt sacred among my people has been honored not through empty gestures, but through genuine friendship, patience, and trust on both sides. She turned to face Daniel directly. Today, the Dragon Kingdom recognizes Daniel Reyes not merely as the one who saved our heir, but as her chosen protector, and as an honorary guardian of our royal line, a title never before given to someone outside our people. A murmur rippled through the crowd, both surprise and quiet approval blending together. Even Kova, standing near the back with arms crossed, offered a small, respectful nod, his earlier suspicion finally settling into acceptance. Daniel stepped forward, unsure exactly what was expected of him, but Sarai simply extended a clawed hand, resting it gently on his shoulder. "You need not say anything grand," she said quietly, "just for him. You never have." Daniel managed a small, honest smile. "I just wanted her to stop shaking that night," he said. "Everything else just happened." Sarai's eyes softened further. "That is exactly why it worked." The ceremony continued into the evening, filled with simple food, simple conversation, and the kind of laughter that came naturally once fear had fully faded. Human children chased young dragons across the field, both groups shrieking with laughter rather than terror. Farmers exchanged stories with dragon engineers about crops and machinery, discovering more similarities between their two worlds than either had expected. As the sun began to set, Daniel finally found a quiet moment away from the crowd, sitting on the same fence he had repaired countless times since that stormy night. Scout settled beside him, resting her head against his shoulder the way she had done since she was small enough to fit in his arms. "You did all this," Daniel said softly, watching the colorful chaos of humans and dragons mixing across his once quiet farm. "All I did was feed you soup." Scout let out a low, amused rumble, nudging him playfully, and Daniel laughed for what felt like the first time in months, without worry weighing down the sound. Above them, the sky slowly filled with the soft glow of early stars, dragon ships resting peacefully across fields that had once grown only corn and quiet routine. Dunmore was no longer forgotten. It had become something new, a bridge between two worlds built not through conquest or clever politics, but through one farmer's simple refusal to let something hungry go unfed. As night settled fully over the farm, Daniel looked out at the mix of humans and dragons sharing laughter beneath the stars, and understood, finally, that his quiet life had not ended that stormy night. It had simply grown large enough to hold an entire kingdom, and he would not have changed a single moment of it. The sun would rise again over Dunmore the next morning, as it always had, but this time, when it did, Daniel would no longer stand alone at his door. Beside him, forever now, stood a kingdom that remembered exactly who had fed a hungry dragon baby when no one else even knew she existed.